4 nuns vanished one stormy night in 1947. No ransom, no remains. Just silence. And a church that sealed the doors before sunrise. 78 years later, an investigative historian unearths the truth buried beneath the river, a truth the church swore never existed. What began as an academic inquiry becomes a descent into faith, obsession, and something that refuses to stay buried. If mysteries like this haunt you, hit subscribe and follow the investigation. The first bell of St. Cecilia's Convent rang at 5:30 a.m. sharp, as it had every day since the foundation was laid in 1893. By 6, the second bell would call the sisters to morning prayer, and by 7, they would be in the chapel, their voices a soft river of chant weaving through the stone nave. But on the morning of April 17th, 1947, the second bell never sounded. Sister Agnes was the first to notice. Her small chamber overlooked the west courtyard, and the silence struck her before the dawn light had even reached the window. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the chill of spring clinging to her bones, and listened. The chapel bell rope should have moved with the rhythm of devotion by now, but there was nothing. When she stepped into the corridor, the air was wrong. Still, thick. The smell of wax and incense clung too strongly, as if the night had never ended. She knocked gently on the first door she passed. Sister Miriam's cell. No answer. Another, Sister Ruth's. Silence again. The unease crept in like a slow frost. By the time Mother Superior Helena emerged from her room, the convent had fallen into a whispering confusion. Doors were opened, beds found unslept in, candles discovered burned down to pools of wax. "Where are they?" someone murmured. No one answered. 4 nuns, Sisters Miriam, Ruth, Claire, and Beatrice, were missing. Their habits still hung on the pegs in the laundry, their rosaries laid on the nightstands beside folded prayer books. Every door leading outside had been locked from within. By noon, Father Benedict from the adjoining parish had arrived, his face pale as he crossed the threshold. He walked the corridors with the Mother Superior, pausing at each open cell. The women of St. Cecilia's followed in silence, their soft-soled shoes whispering against the stone floor. "Perhaps they left in the night?" he suggested weakly. Mother Helena's eyes were tired, almost resigned. Without their shoes, without their veils. "No, Father, our sisters don't leave. If they're gone, then something else stayed in their place." In the chapel, the last candle still burned, its flame small and defiant. On the altar lay an opened Bible, its pages stiffened with wax drips and the faint imprint of a hand pressed into the margin. The verse visible beneath the handprint read, "And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." John 1:5. Outside, the rain began to fall, steady, cleansing, relentless. By dusk, the police from Waco had cordoned off the convent. The press arrived within the hour, flashbulbs cutting through the mist as headlines were already being written. 4 nuns vanish from Texas convent. Police baffled. Yet behind those iron gates, the investigation met silence. The church requested privacy. Witnesses were discouraged from speaking. Files disappeared. Within weeks, the case was quietly shelved. Decades later, when the convent was sold to the diocese and most of the original buildings demolished, a construction worker claimed he found something sealed behind the foundation wall, a rosary twisted into a shape that no one could explain, and a note in faded ink that read only one word: "Confess." He turned it in to the local police. The item never made it to evidence. Rain swept across the Texas hill country like a gray veil, soft at first, then harder, needling the windshield of Dr. Evelyn Hart's rental sedan. The wipers thudded a slow rhythm as she followed the narrow county road toward the crumbling spire that had once crowned St. Cecilia's convent. She had spent 15 years studying post-war disappearances within religious institutions, And St. Cecilia's was the case that refused to let her go. The official file ended with the words, "Insufficient evidence." Yet an unsigned letter mailed to her university last month contained only a photocopy of an old photograph, 4 nuns standing in sunlight, and a handwritten note. "Come before they tear it down." The walls, remember, the convent grounds were mostly rubble now. The diocese had sold the land to a private developer, and demolition crews had already gutted half the chapel. Evelyn parked beside a temporary fence and showed her credentials to the foreman, who waved her through with a look that mixed curiosity and pity. "You've got an hour before we start back up," he warned. "Watch your step in there." Floors are like paper. Inside, the air smelled of lime dust and mildew. Sunlight filtered through the skeletal roof beams, tracing pale bars across the cracked tiles. Evelyn's boots echoed as she crossed what had once been the nave. Birds had nested where candles once burned. She took out her small recorder. "Field note," she murmured. "St. Cecilia's Convent, April 12, 2025. Site partially demolished. Objective: locate any surviving archival material before disposal." A sharp clang echoed from somewhere beyond the choir stalls. She froze, pulse quickening. Probably a loose sheet of metal, she told herself. Still, the place felt occupied. Not by people exactly, but by memory itself. In the corner near what remained of the sacristy door, she found a rust-stained cabinet half buried in debris. Its drawers were swollen with moisture, but one slid open under her tug. Inside lay parish registers, water-damaged but intact, and a bundle of personal journals tied with a brittle ribbon. The first page bore the neat, looping script of Sister Miriam Lowell, 1946. Evelyn sat on a fallen beam and read by the gray light, December 3rd, 1946. Sister Beatrice hears voices when the bells are silent. We think it is the wind, but the wind does not call names. She looked up, heart hammering. Voices. The legend had always included rumors of auditory miracles, whispers at dawn. But here it was in the nun's own hand. A sudden gust blew through the broken windows, scattering pages across the floor like frightened doves. Evelyn lunged to catch them, knees striking the tile. As she gathered the papers, she noticed something wedged beneath the cabinet, a wooden crucifix wrapped in linen. The cloth was mottled dark with age, and stitched along one edge were the initials CR, Sister Claire Ronan. She recorded softly, "Possible personal relic of Sister Claire. Evidence of concealment." Then she stopped speaking because she realized she was not alone. A figure stood in the doorway. An elderly man in a work coat, cap in hand. His face was deeply lined, eyes clouded but alert. "You shouldn't be in here, miss," he said, voice trembling with both authority and fear. "I have permission," Evelyn replied. "I'm with the university archives." He nodded slowly. "University, huh? They sent one before, back in the 70s. Never came back." Evelyn studied him. "Were you here then?" He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Name's Raymond Cobb. I was the caretaker after the sisters left. Kept the place from falling apart, mostly, till it didn't matter no more." She gestured to the ruins. "Do you remember the day they disappeared?" Raymond's gaze drifted toward the roofless choir. "I remember the smell. Rain and candle smoke. Police everywhere. Priests arguing. They said the sisters walked out, but I found their shoes in the laundry, still damp from washing. People don't walk far without shoes. Did you ever find anything else?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin box. "Kept this all these years." Inside lay a fragment of parchment, browned with age. Faded ink formed a single Latin phrase. "Lux in tenebris lucet." "The light shines in darkness," Evelyn translated. Raymond nodded. "Same verse they found open on the altar. Some things don't change," thunder rolled in the distance. Evelyn slipped the parchment into an evidence sleeve, aware of the gravity of touching something that had survived both faith and secrecy. Why keep it? She asked. Because they told me to burn it, he said. And I wanted to see what truth the fire wasn't supposed to touch. They stood in silence until the foreman's shout carried from outside. Time's up! We're bringing the walls down! Raymond turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. If you're smart, you'll let them finish the job. Some prayers weren't meant to be answered. Evelyn watched him vanish into the rain, then looked back at the cabinet. She couldn't shake the feeling that something else waited beneath the rubble. Something deliberately buried. As the first swing of a wrecking ball boomed through the chapel, dust exploded around her in a white storm. She clutched the journals to her chest and ran for the door, coughing as the air filled with centuries of silence finally breaking apart. Outside, the bell tower shuddered, then collapsed in on itself. The sound was both ending and beginning. She opened her notebook, hands still shaking, and wrote, "The case of the 4 vanished sisters. Reactivation date. Today." The next morning, Austin's light came gray and hesitant through the curtains of Evelyn Hart's rented flat. Her desk was covered in last night's debris, mud-flecked notebooks, crumbling paper sleeves, her recorder still flashing red. She hadn't slept much. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the convent collapsing in slow motion, the bell tower falling like a severed limb, the air thick with white dust and whispers. Coffee steamed beside her laptop. She opened the digital scans she'd taken before midnight, adjusting the brightness on Sister Miriam's diary pages. The ink had bled, but fragments remained legible. March 1947. Sister Claire says the new confessor asks too many questions. He writes down what we say in confession. She fears it is not for God, but for men. April 10th. There is talk of transfer. Mother Helena says obedience protects us. Yet my dreams are filled with thunder, and the faces of angels turned away. Evelyn frowned. A confessor? There was no record of a priest assigned to St. Cecilia's in 1947, other than Father Benedict. She made a note to check diocesan rosters later. Her email pinged. An unfamiliar address. Subject line: "You found them, didn't you?" The message contained no body, only an attachment. A high-resolution scan of an old black-and-white photograph. Evelyn hesitated before opening it. The image resolved slowly. A group of 5 women in habits, standing in the convent garden. 4 she recognized immediately. The missing sisters. The 5th stood slightly apart, face half in shadow, veil darker than the rest. At the bottom of the photo, written in ink nearly lost to time, St. Cecilia's Retreat, March 1947, 5th sister, unidentified. Her pulse quickened. All historical records listed only 8 nuns at St. Cecilia's during that year, none unnamed. Whoever took this photograph had captured a person who, officially, didn't exist. Evelyn zoomed in. The shadowed figure's posture was peculiar. Stiff, head tilted slightly downward, as if listening to something only she could hear. In her hands, she held a rosary, unlike the others. Carved wooden beads, the crucifix slightly misshapen. Evelyn froze. The crucifix matched the one she'd found wrapped in linen beneath the cabinet. Coincidence or message? She checked the metadata of the email, routed through several anonymous servers, the last one local to Waco. Someone nearby wanted her to look deeper. By afternoon, she was driving again, heading toward the diocese archives, an austere limestone building surrounded by manicured hedges. Inside, the air smelled of paper and lemon polish. At the reception desk, a young cleric looked up from his monitor. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I emailed earlier. Dr. Evelyn Hart, University of Texas. I requested access to the post-war parish records of St. Cecilia's Convent." He checked the list. "Ah, yes. You'll be meeting Father Adrian." Father Adrian appeared a few minutes later. Late 50s, polite, his collar perfectly straight. He led her through the archives, long aisles of shelved files and faint Gregorian chant playing from somewhere unseen. "You're interested in the 1947 incident," he said without looking at her. "We get a few inquiries every decade or so. Tragic, really tragic and unresolved." Evelyn replied, "I'm hoping to review any correspondence between St. Cecilia's and the diocese prior to April of that year." He nodded slowly. Some of those records were lost in a flood. Others were sealed. Internal church discretion. Sometimes the past serves better in silence. Evelyn stopped walking. "Father, I'm not here to sensationalize." 4 women disappeared, and the church closed its doors around the truth. "Don't you think faith deserves honesty?" He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Wait here." He disappeared through a side door and returned with a slim, dust-covered box marked Restricted, SC47. He set it on the table and slid it toward her. "You have 1 hour. Nothing leaves this room." Inside were letters, confession summaries, and a small envelope of photographs. Evelyn's hands trembled as she sorted through them. One letter, dated March 5, 1947, caught her eye. It was written by Mother Helena Barrett to the bishop. "Your Excellency, we receive the visiting confessor as ordered, but some of the sisters are unsettled by his manner. His sermons dwell on purification through disappearance. I fear misunderstanding. Please advise. Purification through disappearance." The phrase chilled her. She looked at the envelope of photographs. 7 in total. 5 matched the one emailed to her earlier. One, however, showed only a corridor, light spilling from a cracked door, and the edge of a black veil disappearing around a corner. On the back, a faint pencil note read, "Taken April 16, 1947. Last sighting of Sister Beatrice." Evelyn's recorder was already running. "Subject photographed night before disappearance," she whispered. "Possible involvement of visiting priest." Father Adrian's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You shouldn't take those notes out of context," he said softly. "Some events resist explanation." She met his gaze. "That's exactly why they need one." He smiled sadly. "The church survives on mystery. Scholars survive on evidence. We serve different gods, Dr. Hart." As she left the archives, the sky was already bruising toward twilight. On the passenger seat lay a copy of the photograph with the 5th nun. She noticed something she hadn't before. Etched faintly in the background wall behind the women was a shape, almost erased by age. A cross carved upside down. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. She answered. A man's voice, gravelly, almost whispering. "If you want to know what happened to them, come to the River Chapel tonight. Midnight. Bring the photograph." The line went dead. Evelyn sat in her car, heart pounding, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Outside, the evening bells of Austin began to ring, slow, deliberate, hauntingly familiar. The river cut through the valley like a vein of mercury, reflecting what little moonlight managed to break through the clouds. Evelyn parked her car on the gravel shoulder beside the old bridge, killed the headlights, and sat in silence. The rhythmic rush of water below carried an uncanny calm, masking the unease crawling beneath her ribs. The map she'd pulled from the diocesan archives showed the river chapel of St. Veronica 2 miles south of the demolished convent. Long abandoned, built before the turn of the century, now swallowed by floodplain. Few locals even remembered it, but the voice on the phone had been clear. Midnight. Bring the photograph. Her watch read 11:47. She tucked the copied photo of the 5 nuns into a folder, wrapped her raincoat tight, and stepped into the night. The path toward the chapel wound through thick underbrush and skeletal trees. Wind hissed through the branches, carrying the faint metallic scent of water and decay. A quarter-mile in, she saw it. The stone archway of the chapel half collapsed, its bell tower nothing more than a stump. Moonlight poured through the broken roof, illuminating the altar that still stood, tilted but defiant. Someone was already there. A figure knelt before the altar, motionless, head bowed. A flashlight lay beside them, its beam grazing the floor in a trembling circle. Evelyn hesitated, then stepped forward slowly, boots crunching on gravel. "Hello?" The figure lifted their head. An old man, face gaunt, hair white, eyes sharp even in the half-light. He wore a tattered clerical collar. "You came," he said. His voice was the same one from the phone, rough, weary, almost relieved. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked. "My name doesn't matter." "Once, they called me Brother Isaac. I was a novice at St. Cecilia's when the sisters disappeared." Evelyn's heart thudded. "You were there?" "That night." He nodded slowly. "And I've been paying for it ever since." He gestured for her to sit on one of the fallen pews. She obeyed, careful, recorder still in her pocket. The air smelled of damp stone and mold. "Why contact me?" she asked. "Because they're about to destroy the last thing left of the truth," Isaac said. "And once it's gone, no one will remember what the church buried." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small tin container, rusted, dented, tied shut with twine. He placed it on the pew between them. "This belonged to Sister Beatrice. I took it from her cell the night she vanished." Evelyn hesitated, then untied the twine. Inside were several items: a rosary missing its cross, a piece of parchment, and a faded photograph identical to hers. But this one had something hers didn't. The shadowed fifth nun's face was visible, faintly overexposed, yet discernible. It was not a woman's face. Evelyn's breath caught. The figure in the habit was a man. Brother Isaac's voice cracked. "He came as a confessor, sent by the bishop himself. Said he was from the Order of St. Michael, but he wasn't like any priest I'd ever met. He spoke of cleansing the body to free the soul, of darkness as divine order. The sisters trusted him. He had charm, a gentleness that hid the hunger underneath." He looked up at the gaping hole in the roof where the stars blurred through cloud. "One night, I heard chanting in the crypt below the chapel. I went down thinking it was the sisters in prayer. But what I saw..." He paused, trembling. He was there with them. Candles everywhere. 4 women kneeling before him. He held up their rosaries, one by one, and said they would be reborn in the light. I ran before I saw more. The next morning, they were gone. Evelyn swallowed hard. "You told no one." "I told the Mother Superior." 2 days later, the bishop arrived. He said God would handle it and ordered everyone to silence. He transferred me to another parish. I left the cloth a year later. He pressed the photograph into her hands. He wasn't a confessor. He was an exorcist, cast out of the Vatican for heresy. The church called him Father Corbin. Evelyn stared at the photo, the man's faint smile frozen in ghostly blur. "And you think he killed them?" Isaac's eyes filled with something between pity and dread. "Killed? Number. That would have been mercy. He took them for something else. Something he believed would prove that sin could be purified by erasure." A thunderclap split the night. The chapel walls groaned as wind funneled through the hollow nave. Evelyn looked toward the door. Movement. A light flickered between the trees. "Someone's here," she whispered. Isaac's expression darkened. "They found me." "Who?" "The same ones who sent the confessor 70 years ago. They don't like ghosts returning to the living." He grabbed her arm, urgent. "Take the box. Leave through the river path. If you hear the bells, don't look back." Before Evelyn could respond, glass shattered behind the altar. Flashlights sliced through the dark. Voices shouted, male, firm, commanding. "Hands where we can see them." Police or something else? Isaac stepped between her and the light. "Go!" he hissed. Evelyn ducked behind the pew, clutching the tin box to her chest, and bolted toward the side door. She stumbled down the overgrown slope toward the riverbank. Behind her came the crack of gunfire, 2 sharp reports, then silence. She didn't stop running until her boots hit the muddy edge of the river. Rain began again, heavy and cold, masking her ragged breath. She looked back once. The chapel glowed faintly with torchlight. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She answered instinctively. No voice, only the faint toll of a bell, distant but deliberate, echoing across the water. She stared into the darkness, heart pounding. Somewhere upstream, a shape moved against the current, something pale drifting through the water like a shroud. A nun's veil. It snagged on the reeds near her feet, sodden, ancient, embroidered with a single letter stitched in blue thread. M. Sister Miriam. Evelyn sank to her knees, rain washing the mud from the fabric. The bell kept tolling, slow and endless, until it became impossible to tell if the sound came from the church ruins or from inside her own mind. Dawn broke colorless over Austin. The rain had eased, leaving a sky the shade of old pewter. Evelyn sat in her apartment kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the tin box Brother Isaac had thrust into her hands. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. Her phone lay beside it, screen dark, the last call still logged as unknown. She had tried calling back, no connection. Every number that had reached her since this began vanished into static. She turned her attention to the box. The twine was frayed, the lid stiff with rust. When she pried it open again, the smell of aged linen and dust escaped, faintly sweet, faintly decayed, like something that had waited too long to be remembered. Inside, the fragment of parchment, the broken rosary, and the photograph of the 5th nun, whose face now stared back from the blur. Father Corbin. Evelyn laid the items in a neat line on the table. She photographed each one, logged coordinates, time, and context, as method demanded. But her hands trembled more than she cared to admit. The parchment came first. It bore writing in Latin so faint she had to use her phone's flashlight and a magnifier. Words emerged in fragments: ad lumen per absentium carnis, purificatio per vacuum. She scribbled a translation in her notebook. Toward light through absence of flesh. Purification through emptiness. It wasn't scripture. It sounded like a creed, ritual language. The rosary was next. Its beads were carved wood, edges smooth with wear, but the crucifix was missing. The chain ended abruptly, as if snapped off by force. Holding it made her uneasy. The wood was warm to the touch, impossibly so. Then the photograph. She enlarged it on her laptop, adjusting contrast. Father Corbin's face sharpened. A man in his mid-30s, narrow features, eyes half closed as if in prayer. But behind him, faintly visible, was something else. A shadow on the chapel wall, tall, misshapen, with a hint of antlers. Evelyn blinked. When she zoomed in further, the distortion dissolved into grain. She sat back, exhaling. Fatigue could invent monsters. A knock at the door made her jump. 3 raps, measured, patient. She hesitated, then peered through the peephole. A man in plain clothes stood in the hall. Early 40s, damp trench coat, ID wallet raised. Dr. Hart, Detective Alan Serrano, Travis County Sheriff's Office. I'd like a word. She opened the door cautiously. He flashed his badge again. We found your name on a card at the River Chapel site last night. Mind if I come in? Evelyn stepped aside. Brother Isaac called me there. What happened to him? Serrano removed his hat, water dripping onto the floor. You tell me. We found 2 sets of footprints, his and yours, and blood on the altar steps. No body yet. Her stomach tightened. He told me he was being hunted. Serrano raised an eyebrow. By who? He didn't say, but he gave me something. It might explain everything. She gestured to the table. He approached, hands in pockets. eyes scanning the artifacts. "You've been busy." "It's evidence," she said. He smiled faintly. "You sound like us." "I'm a historian," she replied. "Different kind of detective." He nodded at the photograph. "Who's the man?" "Father Corbin. The confessor sent to St. Cecilia's in 1947. He might have been behind the disappearances." Serrano frowned. "That name doesn't appear in diocesan records." "It wouldn't." Isaac said he was excommunicated. "Heretical practices. Something called the Order of Absence." The detective leaned closer. "Never heard of it?" Neither had I, but he claimed Corbin believed in purification through disappearance, that the sister's vanishing was a ritual, not a crime. Serrano studied her. "You realize how this sounds?" "I do. But I saw a veil float down that river last night, detective. A veil embroidered with Sister Miriam's initial." He exhaled slowly. "We'll send divers when the current drops." As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. The parchment. "Mind if I take a photo?" "Go ahead." He snapped it with his phone. "We've got a translator who might help." Before he left, he paused at the door. "Dr. Hart, whatever you think you're chasing, be careful. Some truths have graves for a reason." After he was gone, the apartment felt heavier. The rain began again, soft at first, then hammering the windows. Evelyn lit a lamp and opened Sister Miriam's journal to the final pages. April 15th. "He says the body is a cage, that to love God truly we must vanish from the world so the soul may shine unshadowed. I'm afraid. I no longer dream, only remember light too bright to see." April 16th. "The river calls. Tomorrow he says we will cross into grace. I do not think he means heaven." Evelyn's throat tightened. These were not metaphors. They were instructions. She glanced at the rosary again, the missing crucifix, the unnatural warmth. She turned it over, and a small inscription caught the lamplight, burned into the wood rather than carved. A symbol, a triangle surrounding an empty circle. She recognized it instantly. It appeared in several banned theological manuscripts she'd studied. Sigil of the Ordo Vacui, a rumored sect expelled from Rome in 1939 for doctrinal voidism. The belief that God's purest form was absence, that the divine existed most fully where life ceased. Her pulse quickened. If Father Corbin had belonged to that sect, the sisters hadn't simply vanished. They had been sacrificed to emptiness. She recorded quietly. Evidence suggests connection between St. Cecilia, disappearances, and the Ordo Vacui. Possible ritual purification doctrine. Further investigation required. As she spoke, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. She froze. The air had shifted, pressure thickening, temperature dropping. From the corner of the room came a faint metallic click, like beads striking wood. The rosary. It lay where she'd left it, motionless. Then one bead rolled on its own, slow and deliberate, tracing a small circle before stopping. Evelyn stood, backing away. Her rational mind fought to explain it. Vibration from traffic, breeze, anything. But her apartment was silent, sealed. The bead twitched again, and then, faintly beneath the rain, came the sound she feared most, the low toll of a bell, distant but clear, counting 3 slow notes. 3, the number of vows, poverty, chastity, obedience. Her voice shook as she whispered into the recorder. Audible phenomenon, possible acoustic carryover from local church, time code 0217. A knock interrupted her, sharp, sudden, echoing through the apartment. She turned. The door was ajar. She was sure she'd locked it. On the floor just inside lay an envelope, damp with rain. No name, only a crimson wax seal pressed with the same triangle and circle symbol as the rosary. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in immaculate script. You cannot study the void, Dr. Hart. You can only join it. The paper smelled faintly of incense and river water. Outside, somewhere far off, the bells began again. The rain eased by mid-morning, leaving the city glazed and quiet. Evelyn drove west through narrow streets, still slick from the storm, the windshield wipers ticking in slow rhythm. The red envelope lay on the passenger seat like a wound she couldn't ignore. She'd spent the dawn hours digging through university databases and obscure theological indices. And one name kept surfacing beneath different guises: Ordo Vacui. A handful of records linked the sect to a small seminary near Waco that had closed abruptly in 1950. Its files transferred to a place called the House of Records, a diocesan storage facility built from the bones of an old rectory. That was where she was going now. The building appeared at the end of a quiet street, 3 stories of soot-black stone with boarded windows and a wrought iron gate bearing a rusted plaque: Archivum Sanctorum. No signage, no cars. Only a single light glowed behind the frosted glass door. Evelyn pressed the buzzer. After a pause, a voice crackled through the speaker. "State your purpose." "Dr. Evelyn Hart, University of Texas. I have diocesan clearance from Father Adrian." A moment's silence, then the lock clicked. "5 minutes," the voice said. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and dust. Shelves rose like pillars, stacked with unlabeled boxes. A woman in a gray habit emerged from the shadows. Mid-40s, sharp-featured, eyes the color of ash. "I'm Sister Lenora," she said, "custodian of restricted archives. You said you were looking for post-war seminary transfers?" "Yes, specifically the closure files for St. Michael's Seminary, Waco, 1950. Sister Lenora regarded her with faint curiosity. "That's not a popular request." Evelyn managed a thin smile. "History rarely is." The nun led her through a corridor lined with filing cabinets, so old their handles were tarnished green. At the end stood a heavy door secured by 2 locks. Lenora produced a ring of keys. "Everything in here was meant to disappear quietly," she murmured. "Some of it to protect the church, and some of it to protect everyone else. Please be discreet." The room beyond was small, lit by a single bulb swinging gently overhead. Piles of file boxes covered a central table. Dust hung in the air like fine smoke. Evelyn set down her recorder. "For academic documentation," she said. Lenora nodded. "As long as it stays academic." Evelyn worked fast, scanning box labels. St. Michael's faculty, 1945 to 50. Dismissed clergy. Investigative notes. Her fingers stopped on a thin binder stamped C-47. Inside were typed reports, most with blacked-out passages. The first page carried a heading that made her pulse quicken. Subject: Corben, Matthias A., formerly Farrer. She read aloud under her breath. "Expelled from Pontifical Order of St. Michael, 1939, for propagation of doctrine of negation. Re-entered United States under civilian alias. Unauthorized ministry reported at St. Cecilia's Convent, April 1947. Disposition, sealed by Episcopal order." There was a photograph clipped to the report. A younger Corbin in clerical collar, gaze intense, almost serene. Someone had drawn a faint circle around his left eye in red pencil. Evelyn turned another page. Handwritten notes filled the margins. Subsect calling itself Children of the Absence. Rituals mimic exorcism. Goal unclear. She looked up. "Sister Lenora, who wrote these?" The nun hesitated. That would have been Father Benedict, the parish investigator assigned after the disappearances, the same Father Benedict who served St. Cecilia's. "Yes." Evelyn's voice lowered. "What happened to him?" Lenora's expression dimmed. "He drowned in the river 6 months later." Evelyn swallowed hard. "The same river where the veil surfaced." Lenora nodded once. History repeats, Doctor, especially when people dig where graves were meant to stay shut. Evelyn flipped to the last document, a yellowed telegram dated May 12, 1947, from Diocesan Office, Austin, to Father Benedict. Subject, containment. Text, cease inquiries. Vault under St. Veronica Chapel to be sealed. Do not open the confessor's box. The words sent a shiver up her spine. The confessor's box. She'd thought the phrase metaphorical, but here it was official. What vault? She asked. Lenora's voice dropped. There's a crypt beneath the river chapel, the one you visited. It was sealed by cement in 1948. The box was said to be inside. Evelyn leaned closer. Do you know what was in it? No one does, the nun said softly. Only that when the sealant dried, the bells began ringing though the ropes had been cut. A faint vibration hummed through the floorboards, almost on cue, as if the building itself remembered. Lenora drew a slow breath. You shouldn't be here. I need copies of these files, Evelyn said. The nun shook her head. That would require written authorization from the bishop. Evelyn hesitated, then opened her satchel and produced the red sealed envelope that had appeared at her apartment door. Would this qualify? Lenora's eyes widened. She broke into a whisper. Where did you get that? It was left for me last night. The nun reached out but stopped short of touching it. This seal hasn't been used since 1952. It belongs to the Diocesan Tribunal, the order that handled heresy proceedings. Whatever you're entangled in, it didn't end with Corbin. Evelyn folded the envelope away. All the more reason to finish it. Lenora stepped back toward the door. Take what you need. And pray you never find the vault. When the door closed behind her, the bulb overhead flickered. Evelyn gathered the Corbin file, slipped several photocopies into her folder, and turned to leave. But movement caught her eye, something shifting behind a shelf. She froze. A thin line of light seeped through a crack in the wall. She pushed the shelf aside. It groaned against the floor. Behind it, half hidden, was a narrow wooden panel. Scratched into its surface was the same triangle and circle emblem burned into the rosary. Her heartbeat quickened. She pressed gently. The panel gave way, revealing a recess barely big enough for a shoebox. Inside lay a small wooden chest, blackened by age, a silver cross inlaid on its lid, its design identical to the missing crucifix from the broken rosary. Etched beneath the cross were Latin words, non appariatur nisi in veritate, open only in truth. Evelyn exhaled. The confessor's box. She lifted it free. The wood was cold, heavier than expected. Something shifted inside, a soft clink, like metal against glass. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. Caller ID, Detective Serrano. She answered, still staring at the box. Dr. Hart, he said, breath quick. We've found a body at the River Chapel site. Male, elderly, gunshot wound. Could be your brother Isaac. Evelyn closed her eyes. I understand. One more thing, Serrano added. We pulled a fragment from his pocket, a page from a journal. It has your name on it. What does it say? Just one line. He paused. Bring the box home. The call ended. Evelyn looked down at the chest in her hands. The faint smell of river water rose from the seams. Outside, the first church bell of noon began to toll. Slow, deliberate, impossibly distant. The St. Veronica Chapel stood forgotten at the far end of the river's bend, where the cypress trees leaned low enough to touch the water. Once a place of pilgrimage, it was now a ruin. A sagging roof line, boarded windows, its bell tower choked with vines. Detective Serrano parked beside Evelyn's car in the gravel lot. The noon heat shimmered, carrying the smell of damp earth and stone. You sure this is the place? He asked, eyeing the chapel's crooked cross. Father Benedict's notes mentioned a vault under here, she replied, and Isaac's message said, Bring the box home. This is the only place that makes sense. Serrano looked unconvinced. The site's condemned. You realize we're trespassing on church property. Evelyn lifted the small wooden chest from her bag. So was Brother Isaac. He sighed. All right. But if this floor caves in, I'm blaming you. They entered through the broken door. Dust motes swirled in the dim light filtering through cracked stained glass. The air smelled faintly metallic, like blood and stone. Evelyn's footsteps echoed as she approached the altar, its marble surface fractured, the crucifix missing from its mount. This place hasn't been touched in decades, Serrano said quietly. Evelyn knelt and brushed dust away from the floor tiles. Beneath years of grime, faint carvings emerged, Latin inscriptions encircling the altar base. Sub carne, lux, sub lux, silentium. Beneath flesh, light. Beneath light, silence, she translated. Serrano frowned. Cryptic. Literal, she said. There's something below. He watched as she ran her hands along the seam where altar met floor. The stone shifted slightly under pressure, revealing a narrow gap. Serrano crouched, shone his flashlight inside, and exhaled. There's a ladder. Evelyn's heart thudded. Help me move it. Together they slid the altar aside, revealing a square opening leading into blackness. A stale gust of air rose up, smelling of mildew and candle soot. You really want to go down there? Serrano asked. Do you? He smirked faintly. After last night, I don't let civilians into crypts alone. He went first, flashlight beam slicing the dark, boots clanging against rusted rungs. Evelyn followed, the box slung across her shoulder. The shaft descended 15 feet before opening into a narrow passage of stone, walls slick with condensation. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved forward. Old plaques lined the walls, names eroded by time. Evelyn brushed one clean enough to read, Sister Miriam E. Her voice trembled. She's here. Serrano panned his light across the corridor. More plaques followed. Sister Agnes, Sister Ruth, Sister Claire. 4 in total. Beneath them, shallow alcoves sealed by concrete. This must be where they buried them after the investigation, Serrano said. Evelyn shook her head. No, their bodies were never recovered. These are memorials, not graves. Ahead, the corridor widened into a small chamber. The ceiling arched low, black with soot. At its center stood a massive iron door embossed with a triangle encircling an empty circle. The same symbol, Serrano muttered. The Ordo Vacui, Evelyn whispered. The vault Father Benedict was ordered to seal. The door had no handle, only a single keyhole. Evelyn reached into her bag and retrieved the crucifix fragment from the rosary. Its base was shaped like a key. She looked at Serrano. If I'm right. He raised a hand. Wait, we should call this in first. She met his gaze steadily. If we do, it'll be sealed again. Forever. After a long pause, he nodded. All right, but we do this together. Evelyn inserted the crucifix into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. A metallic click echoed, followed by a low groan as the mechanism shifted. The door swung inward with surprising ease. The vault beyond was circular, lined with shelves that once held reliquaries but now sat empty. In the center stood a stone table draped in rotted linen. Candles, long melted into puddles, surrounded it. Evelyn's breath caught. It's an altar. Serrano stepped closer, sweeping his light across the walls. Symbols were carved everywhere. Circles within triangles, Latin phrases looping endlessly. Ad lumen per absentium carnis. The same phrase from the parchment, she murmured. On the altar lay a small pile of objects. 4 veils, brittle and yellowed, and a 5th item wrapped in cloth. Evelyn reached out and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a glass vial sealed with wax. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, dark as ink. A tag hung from the neck, inscribed in faded script, Corbin. Serrano leaned in. You think that's his remains? Or something he used? Suddenly, the temperature dropped. Serrano's breath misted. What the hell? The candles, long dead, flickered to life. Their flames burned blue. A low hum filled the chamber, like distant chanting beneath water. The walls seemed to pulse with it. Evelyn gripped the box tighter against her chest. "Detective," she whispered, "we're not alone." From the shadows beyond the altar, a figure emerged, draped in tattered vestments, face hidden beneath a veil of dust. The air rippled around him, bending the candlelight. Serrano drew his weapon. "Stay back." The figure didn't move closer, only raised a hand in benediction. His voice, when it came, was a hollow whisper, light through absence, flesh through faith. "You should not have opened the gate." Evelyn's voice shook. "Father Corbin?" The figure tilted its head slowly. "Names are cages." Serrano aimed higher. "This ends now." The figure extended its hand toward Evelyn. "You brought it home." The box. Before she could react, the lid snapped open by itself, revealing a small mirror set into the interior. But the reflection didn't show her face. It showed the chapel above, bright with morning light and filled with women kneeling in prayer. The missing nuns. Evelyn gasped. "They're alive?" The figure stepped closer. "No, they are remembered." Serrano's gun trembled. "What does that mean?" "Faith made them vanish," the figure said. "You made them return." The candles flared, blinding white. Evelyn threw up her hands to shield her eyes. When the light faded, the vault was empty, the altar bare, the air still. Only the vial remained on the floor, shattered. Its contents seeped into the stone, forming a dark sigil that pulsed once, then stilled. Serrano exhaled shakily. "Tell me that was a trick of the light." Evelyn stared at the box in her hands, now completely empty. "I don't think it was." From somewhere above, faint and distant, the chapel bell began to toll. 12 slow chimes. Serrano holstered his gun. "We're leaving." Now. As they climbed the ladder back into daylight, Evelyn looked down one last time. The vault door had already begun to swing shut on its own, the echo of metal on stone reverberating like a heartbeat. Outside, sunlight streamed through the clouds, bright and indifferent. Serrano wiped sweat from his brow. "You still think this is about history?" Evelyn stared at the chapel, its shadow long against the grass. "No," she said quietly. "It's about belief, and what belief leaves behind." She placed the empty box gently on the chapel steps. "Whatever was down there, it's awake now." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of chanting across the river, too low for words, but unmistakably human. Serrano glanced toward the trees. "Do you hear that?" Evelyn didn't answer. She was staring at the water. Something pale floated just beneath the surface, 4 veils drifting side by side, moving against the current. 2 days after the vault, the river began to rise. It wasn't a flood exactly, no rain had fallen, but the current thickened, darkened, as if carrying silt from someplace older than Earth. Evelyn watched from the police tape stretched across the chapel's bank while rescue crews pulled another object from the water. It wasn't a body this time. It was a statue, a stone Madonna, slick with algae and missing both eyes. Detective Serrano stood beside her, coffee cooling in his hand. "Same coordinates as where we found the veils yesterday," he said. "It was buried in the riverbed." "She was meant to stay under," Evelyn murmured. "Something's pushing everything back up." He studied her profile. "You think it's connected to that vault?" "I think we unsealed more than stone." Behind them, technicians logged samples and photographs. Every few minutes, a diver surfaced, shaking his head. Nothing more found yet. But each time the current stirred, the bells of St. Veronica gave a faint, answering tremor. By afternoon, the church arrived. 2 black sedans and a van marked Diocesan Inquiry Office rolled up the gravel road. Out stepped a tall priest in immaculate black, a thin silver chain glinting beneath his collar. His face was pale, angular, composed. "Dr. Hart," he said before she could speak. "I'm Father Alaric DeVoe, appointed by the Archdiocese to oversee containment." Containment. The word sent a small chill through her. Detective Serrano flashed his badge. "Containment of what, Father?" DeVoe's eyes lingered on the detective a moment too long. "Of confusion. Rumor spreads faster than truth." He turned to Evelyn. "You removed a prohibited artifact from church grounds. We will require its return." "It's empty now," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. DeVoe's lips curved faintly. "Artifacts are never truly empty. Please surrender it." She glanced toward the chapel steps where the box had rested after they fled the vault. But it was gone. Only the imprint of its shape remained in dust. "I left it right there," she said. "Then someone retrieved it," DeVoe replied. "All the more reason to ensure no further disturbances." He gestured toward the water, where the statue still glistened on the mud bank. "God buries what man should not remember." Serrano folded his arms. "With respect, Father, this is still a homicide investigation. We're not closing the site." DeVoe's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. I'll see to the spiritual perimeter while you chase your evidence." He walked away, cassock brushing against the wet grass, speaking softly into a small recorder of his own. Evelyn couldn't hear the words, but one phrase carried on the wind. "Ordo vacui renascitur." The order of emptiness is reborn. That evening, Evelyn returned to her apartment to find a letter slid beneath her door. No seal this time, only a smear of river mud across the envelope. Inside, a single Polaroid. It showed the empty crypt they had entered, the altar, the walls. But now a shadow stood where Corbin had appeared, arms raised as if blessing an unseen congregation. On the back, in neat handwriting, "You brought them back. Now return what is theirs." Her hands trembled. She called Serrano. "I just got another message," she said. He sighed on the other end. "I'll send a unit." "No." "Meet me at the station. There's something you need to see." At the precinct, she spread the Polaroid across the conference table beside the photocopied files from the House of Records. Serrano leaned over them. "These were sealed for a reason." "I know. But look at the handwriting on the back of the photo she slid over one of Father Benedict's notes from 1947. The script matched perfectly." Serrano frowned. "He's been dead 75 years. Unless someone's imitating him, or something is." He ran a hand through his hair. "You realize how this sounds in a report? Then write it as pattern repetition," she said. "Phenomenological recurrence. Don't call it haunting." He almost smiled. "You academics have a word for everything." Before he could continue, the lights flickered. Monitors along the wall glitched. Static, then a single frame of distorted footage. The chapel interior, candlelight moving through darkness. The screen went black again. One of the younger officers looked up from his desk. Power surge. Serrano's phone buzzed. He checked it, face tightening. That was the tech unit at the river. Their live feed went out at the same time. "Someone's controlling this," Evelyn said. "Or warning us." By midnight, they were back at the riverbank. The police tent stood half-collapsed in the wind. The statue of the Madonna was gone. Only a hollow impression remained in the mud, as though it had dissolved. Evelyn knelt, shining her flashlight on the imprint. Inside it, water pooled. Not clear, but dark, viscous, and faintly luminous. "Detective," she whispered. "It's moving." The liquid pulsed, sending small ripples outward, though there was no breeze. Then, slowly, letters formed in the surface, as if written by invisible fingers. CORBEN. Serrano backed away. "We're pulling out." But Evelyn couldn't move. The letters spread, rearranging themselves into a phrase. "Doom 'em ready, bring home." The same words found on Isaac's note. A sudden crash behind them, the chapel door slamming open though no one was inside. Wind howled through the rafters, carrying fragments of chanting. Evelyn turned to Serrano. "It's drawing everything back." He grabbed her arm. "Then we end it before it finishes." They ran toward the chapel, flashlights cutting through the dark. Inside, puddles reflected the stained glass like fragments of flame. The altar they'd moved days before stood in place again, perfectly centered, no sign of the vault entrance. Serrano hammered at the marble with a crowbar, grunting. It sealed from below. Evelyn's light caught on something new, symbols freshly carved into the altar's base. Circles within triangles, identical to those in the vault, still wet as though etched moments ago. "They're rewriting it," she breathed, "erasing the seal we made." The floor began to tremble. Dust rained from the rafters. Through the open doorway, the river surged higher, lapping at the threshold. Serrano shouted over the noise, "We need to leave." Evelyn hesitated. On the altar, between the carvings, a small wooden shape protruded, a hinge, familiar. The box. She reached for it just as the lights blew out. Everything went silent. Then a voice whispered behind her ear, neither male nor female, soft as breath. "The river remembers its own." Cold water brushed her ankles. When she turned, Serrano's flashlight lay submerged, beam flickering through rising floodwater that now poured through the doorway like a living thing. Evelyn grabbed the box and stumbled toward the exit. Serrano pulled her through as the chapel's doors slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the ground. They collapsed on the wet grass outside, gasping. The water stopped at the threshold, as if respecting an invisible boundary. The bells began to ring again, this time from beneath the ground, their tone distorted, metallic, unholy. Serrano sat up slowly. "If that's the return," he said hoarsely, "what comes next?" Evelyn opened the box. Inside, for the first time, something glowed. 4 silver rosary beads and a scrap of fabric, river wet and marked with a faint embroidered letter, M. She whispered, "Miriam." The wind carried the sound down the river, and far off, answering softly, came another voice, feminine, distant, singing an old hymn no one had sung since 1947. By dawn, the flood had receded, leaving behind a slick film on the grass like oil on water. The air felt charged, metallic. Evelyn and Serrano sat in his car overlooking the chapel ruins, wrapped in the kind of silence that comes after something you can't explain. Neither had slept. Evelyn turned the box over in her lap. Inside, the 4 rosary beads still gleamed faintly, even though she'd dried them hours ago. Every so often they would tremble together, as if drawn by an invisible pulse. Serrano stared at them. "You sure you didn't put batteries in that thing?" She almost smiled. "If faith had circuitry, the church would have patented it by now." He rubbed his temples. "I'm starting to think faith and crime scenes shouldn't mix." "They always mix," she said. "One just hides the other." He gave her a look, half amusement, half concern. "You need rest." But she couldn't stop thinking about the hymn she'd heard the night before, how the voice had seemed to come from everywhere at once. A song Sister Miriam had written in her diary weeks before vanishing. "Beneath the river's skin we pray, for light to find us when we fade." Evelyn whispered the words without realizing. The beads pulsed again, brighter this time, casting small halos of silver across the dashboard. Serrano flinched. "You're seeing that too, right?" "Yes." The glow faded as quickly as it came, leaving the faint scent of burning incense. Serrano exhaled. "We need help. Someone who understands symbols, rituals, something beyond my pay grade." Evelyn nodded slowly. "There's one person." Father Adrian. He gave me access to the archives. If he's still willing to talk, he'll know what DeVoe is hiding. They found Father Adrian in his study at the diocesan library, a small office smelling of old paper and candle smoke. He looked older than she remembered, eyes sunken, collar askew, a tremor in his hands as he poured tea. "I heard about the river," he said softly, "and the visitors from Rome. You've stirred ancient dust." Dr. Hart Evelyn placed the box on his desk. The dust stirred itself. Adrian regarded it with visible fear. "You brought it here? I don't know where else to take it." He drew the curtains closed and locked the door. "Then listen carefully. The Ordo Vacui wasn't just a heresy. It was a formula. Corbin believed absence itself could sanctify matter. The sisters were his testaments. He called them the 4 veils of purity." "Veils," Evelyn repeated. "We found 4 of them in the river." Adrian nodded grimly. "He bound each with a prayer meant to erase the self completely. But the final prayer, the return, was never completed. Until you opened the vault." Serrano leaned forward. "You're saying we finished a 70-year-old ritual by accident?" Adrian met his gaze. "Not finished." Restarted the box, rattled softly on the table. All 3 froze. Adrian whispered a prayer under his breath. "Every relic remembers. The church tried to silence them with burial and concrete. But silence is only another form of worship." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Then how do we stop it?" He opened a drawer and withdrew an aged manuscript bound in cracked leather. The title burned faintly in Latin, Orationes Vacui. "Corbin's liturgy," Adrian said. "Most of it was destroyed, but this copy survived in secret. There's one passage you need." He flipped to a page near the end and read, "When the 4 veils return to water and the 5th mirror is found, the house of absence shall breathe again. To close the mouth of the river, offer remembrance without faith." Evelyn frowned. "Remembrance without faith?" "It means memory stripped of worship," Adrian said. "You must acknowledge what happened, without giving it devotion." "How?" He looked at her gravely. "By telling the truth aloud. At the place it began. The convent." He nodded. "Before DeVoe seals it again." They drove back through the afternoon heat toward St. Cecilia's hilltop ruins. The demolition crews were gone. Only the empty foundation remained, fenced and silent. Evelyn stood at the edge, wind tugging at her coat. This was their home. Serrano unpacked the recorder. "Then let's give them a voice." Evelyn clicked it on and began to speak. Slowly, steadily, as if reciting history instead of conjuring ghosts. She described the day of the vanishings, the confessor's arrival, the ritual in the crypt, the church's silence. She named every sister aloud. When she reached Sister Miriam's name, the wind shifted. A shimmer rose from the hollow foundation, faint as heat haze. 4 shapes, vague, luminous, stood in the air before her, veils trailing like mist. Serrano whispered, "Holy." "Keep filming," she said. The figures didn't move closer. They simply waited. Evelyn opened the box. The 4 beads glowed again, answering. Adrian's words echoed in her head. "Offer remembrance without faith." She stepped forward, voice shaking. "I remember you." "I don't worship you. I remember your truth." The wind howled. The figures flickered, then began to fade, dissolving into silver motes that drifted toward the river valley below. For a moment, everything was still. Then the ground trembled, a low vibration, like the tolling of a bell miles beneath the earth. Serrano caught her arm. "It's working, or ending. I can't tell which." Light burst upward from the foundation, blinding white, then collapsed inward, leaving only dust and silence. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the box was gone. That night she sat alone on her balcony, recording her notes. Field note, St. Cecilia's site now inert. Apparitions dispersed. The box disintegrated during closure. Detective Serrano will file a secular report listing geological instability as cause. Father Adrian refuses to comment. She paused, looking toward the distant river. Moonlight traced a thin silver ribbon across its surface. The bells didn't ring that night, but as she turned off the recorder, a faint voice rose from the dark, female, serene, whispering the same hymn again. Beneath the river's skin we pray, for light to find us when we fade. The sound faded into the wind, leaving her unsure if she'd truly heard it or if memory itself was still speaking. Evelyn leaned back, exhausted, tears drying on her cheeks. "Rest now," she whispered. "All of you." For the first time since she'd opened the vault, the night felt clean. No static in the air, no pulse beneath the silence. Yet far below, where the river curved like a serpent, something glimmered briefly before sinking, a reflection perhaps, or the echo of a veil. 3 days later, Evelyn was summoned to the archdiocesan office. The letter came printed on thick cream paper, the seal embossed in scarlet wax. Tribunal Ecclesiasticus. The tone was polite, the command unmistakable. Detective Serrano offered to go with her, but she refused. "If they see a badge," she said, "they'll stop talking. I need them to think this is a confession, not an interrogation." He didn't argue, only pressed a small digital recorder into her palm. "Keep it running." The tribunal's offices occupied an old Jesuit seminary on the city's north side, a labyrinth of marble halls and stained glass that caught the sun like blood. A receptionist led her to a chamber lined with dark wood paneling and a crucifix so large it dominated the wall. 3 men waited behind a curved desk. Father DeVoe sat in the center, his hands folded neatly atop a black ledger. To his right, an older Monsignor whose face looked carved from wax. To his left, a younger priest with kind eyes but an expression carefully schooled to neutrality. DeVoe gestured toward the single chair facing them. "Dr. Hart, we appreciate your punctuality." Evelyn sat, the recorder hidden in her sleeve, already rolling. "You said this was about the St. Cecilia incident." DeVoe inclined his head. "Incident implies chance. What occurred was Providence misread. You have interfered with consecrated history." "History doesn't belong to one institution," she said. "Truth does," he replied evenly. The Monsignor spoke next, voice brittle with age. "We reviewed your academic record. You've written extensively on faith and trauma. Tell us, do you believe knowledge redeems suffering?" Evelyn hesitated. "Knowledge illuminates it. That's enough." The old man nodded faintly. "Then you understand why illumination can be dangerous." DeVoe opened the ledger. "We've confirmed you entered restricted property, removed protected relics, and disseminated sealed documents. The church could pursue charges." "I didn't disseminate anything," Evelyn said. "I documented evidence of a crime." "Faith cannot commit crime," DeVoe said. "Faith doesn't drown priests and bury nuns alive," she snapped. The young priest flinched. DeVoe's gaze remained serene. "You speak of violence. We speak of sacrifice." Evelyn leaned forward. The sisters didn't volunteer for sacrifice. They were deceived by Corbin's doctrine, and by the church's silence. For the first time, something flickered behind DeVoe's composure. "You think we created him? I think you hid him." A long pause. The Monsignor closed his eyes, murmuring a prayer. DeVoe rose slowly, circling the table. "You've seen the box," he said. "You've heard the river. Tell me, what did you feel?" "Fear," she said simply. "Fear is faith's first step." He stopped behind her chair. Corbin's order believed the soul could only know God by shedding the illusion of self. The sisters' disappearance was their ascension. They were murdered. DeVoe's voice dropped to a whisper. "Murder is merely the body's interpretation of transcendence." The younger priest shifted uncomfortably. "Father," DeVoe silenced him with a glance. "You claim to seek truth, Dr. Hart, yet you ignore what stands before you." The sister's prayers were answered. The veil returned. "You were chosen to witness." Evelyn turned in her chair to face him. "Chosen? You sent men to silence Isaac, to erase me. That isn't salvation, it's control." DeVoe smiled faintly. "Control is the only way to keep the void contained." He moved back to the table, laying a small object on the wood, a triangular medallion engraved with the empty circle of the Ordo Vacui. "Do you know what this is?" "I've seen the symbol," she said. "This belonged to Father Corbin. It was recovered from the river this morning." Evelyn's pulse spiked. "Recovered?" He nodded. "The water recedes, the past surfaces. Perhaps God is reminding us that nothing is ever truly lost." He slid the medallion toward her. "Take it." She hesitated. "Why?" "Because you've already become its keeper." The air in the chamber thickened, the light from the stained glass shifting from crimson to gold. The crucifix above them seemed to shimmer, the carved Christ's face almost turning toward her. Evelyn fought the rising nausea. "What are you doing?" "Restoring order," DeVoe said. The ritual was incomplete. The sisters returned, but without a vessel to anchor them. "You will finish what Corbin began." Her breath caught. "You're insane." The young priest rose abruptly. "Father, this isn't doctrine." "Sit down," DeVoe commanded, his voice suddenly thunderous. The crucifix rattled against the wall. Evelyn stood. "I'm leaving." DeVoe's eyes glowed with a fervor that frightened her more than any ghost. "You can leave the room, Dr. Hart, but you cannot leave what's inside you. When you opened the box, you invited them in." She stepped back, heart hammering. "If that's true, then you're part of them." He smiled. "We all are." The lights flickered, then steadied. The air snapped cold. On the desk, the medallion vibrated, spinning once before falling flat, triangle pointing directly at Evelyn. The Monsignor gasped. "It responds." DeVoe's expression became reverent. "The fifth mirror accepts her." Evelyn grabbed the medallion and backed toward the door. "You people need exorcising, not theology." "Take it then," DeVoe said calmly. "It will find its way home." She turned and ran. The door slammed behind her, echoing through the marble corridor. Outside, she burst into the blinding sunlight, lungs burning. Serrano's car idled at the curb. He jumped out when he saw her. "What happened?" She dropped the medallion into his hand. "They think I'm part of it now." He looked at the symbol, then at her. "What is it?" "Proof," she said, shaking. "And a threat." They got into the car. She stared out the window as the seminary shrank in the rearview mirror. On the horizon, storm clouds were gathering again, thick and black, moving against the wind. Serrano glanced at her. "You okay?" She touched her chest, where the medallion's chain still rested against her skin. It felt warm, too warm. "Not really," she said softly. "I think I brought something back." He started the engine. "Then let's figure out how to send it home before they do." As they drove away, church bells began ringing across the city. Every parish, every tower, chiming in perfect unison. Evelyn whispered, "The veils are echoing." Serrano tightened his grip on the wheel. "Then we're running out of time." By the time Evelyn reached her apartment, the sky had turned the color of bruised pewter. She shut the door, slid the bolt, and leaned against it, listening to the muffled hum of rain against the windows. Serrano had offered to stay, but she'd insisted on being alone. She needed to think without the noise of sirens or sympathy. The medallion lay on the kitchen table beneath a bare bulb. Even in the dim light it seemed to pulse, faintly, as if breathing. The triangle's inner circle was etched so finely that the lines looked alive, turning slowly in the metal when she moved her head. Evelyn opened her laptop, the recorder still plugged into its port. She played back the tribunal conversation. DeVoe's voice filled the room, measured, calm, certain. When you opened the box, you invited them in. She stopped the playback. The medallion vibrated once, a metallic tremor that rattled the coffee spoon beside it. Evelyn froze, watching it settle. She whispered, "You're not supposed to move." Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the river. She reached for a magnifier and studied the edges. There, beneath the patina, she could see engraved initials, S.C. St. Cecilia. Beneath that, almost invisible, another set of letters, E.H., her own initials. She sat back hard, breath catching. The piece of metal had somehow inscribed her into itself. The doorbell rang. She jumped, knocking the chair over. A single chime, nothing more. Peering through the peephole, she saw no one, only the flickering hallway light. When she opened the door, an envelope lay on the floor. Her name typed neatly. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. 4 women in habits standing before the convent gate. The edges were scorched. On the back, a handwritten note. "They're awake again. Meet me where the river bends." Mem. Evelyn knew that signature. Micah Carraway. She found him that night near the levee where the floodwater had first exposed the crypts. He stood in the rain, a wool coat clinging to his thin frame, a cigarette burning down to his fingers. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning. "They'll be watching you." "I could say the same," she answered. "The police think you're dead." He smiled without humor. "Close enough." She held up the photograph. "You sent this." He nodded. "They've been moving." The river's dropping, revealing what Corbin buried. Not just the car, not just the bodies. The whole geometry. Geometry? "The fifth mirror," Micah said. Corbin drew it from older texts, reflections layered through sacrifice. The sisters were 4 of 5 points. The last was supposed to be him. But he vanished before the ritual closed, and now the church wants a substitute. He looked at her. "You." Evelyn felt the medallion heat against her chest beneath the coat. "Why me?" "Because you opened the box," he said softly. "Because it recognized you." They took shelter under the bridge as rain thickened to sheets. Micah unwrapped a bundle of papers, copies of journals, brittle photographs, pages from a 1947 diocesan investigation that had never reached the public. Corbin believed sound was the key, Micah explained. Each sister represented a tone of the divine chord. When their voices aligned, he thought heaven would answer, "He murdered them to hear God," Evelyn murmured. He thought he was freeing them, and he nearly succeeded. The night they disappeared, witnesses along the river reported hearing a harmony no human throat could produce. Micah looked out at the water. They said it came from beneath the ground. Lightning split the sky. For an instant, Evelyn saw shapes on the opposite bank. 4 pale figures standing ankle-deep in the current, faces lifted toward the storm. When the light faded, the bank was empty. "Tell me you saw that," she whispered. Micah's face went white. "They're not supposed to appear above the water." The medallion burned hotter. Evelyn pulled it from her neck and threw it into the mud. It hissed, steam rising where it struck. Micah grabbed her arm. "No, once it binds, you can't reject it." But she already was. The air around them throbbed, the river's roar deepening into something almost musical. 5 tones interwoven, 1 missing. The sound pressed against her skull until her vision blurred. Then, silence. The rain ceased mid-drop, every droplet hanging motionless in the air for the space of a breath before falling again. Micah stepped back, crossing himself. "You completed it," he said. "I didn't do anything. You listened." He picked up the medallion. It was cool now, the symbol faintly glowing. The 5th mirror isn't an object. It's resonance, and it chose a human host. Evelyn felt hollow, as if her heartbeat had shifted out of rhythm with the world. What happens to the host? They see what's on the other side. He handed her the medallion. If you want to end it, you need to find where Corbin finished the first 4 points. There's a map inside the cathedral archives, but DeVoe will never let you near it. I'll find a way. Micah started to turn, then stopped. Be careful, Doctor. Once you see the reflection, it sees you too. At dawn, she returned to her apartment. The storm had passed, leaving the city glazed in pale light. On her answering machine, Serrano's voice crackled. We need to talk. The church called a press conference. They're announcing a miracle. Evelyn stared at the medallion. In its circle, she could now see faint outlines of 4 veiled women, their mouths open in eternal song. As the sun touched the metal, a 5th silhouette began to form, her own. The press conference was held inside the cathedral nave. Cameras lined the aisles. Light spilled from the rose window like molten glass. Reporters whispered as Father DeVoe stepped to the podium, flanked by the same younger priest from the tribunal. He looked neither triumphant nor apologetic, merely certain. The Church of St. Cecilia, he began, acknowledges divine manifestation at the site of the old convent. 4 sisters have returned, not in body, but in grace. Their voices have been heard once more. The crowd erupted with questions. DeVoe raised a hand. There will be no further comment until the investigation concludes. Faith must breathe before it can speak. Evelyn watched from the back, hidden behind a marble column. Serrano stood beside her, his badge turned inward to avoid attention. They've rebranded a crime scene as a miracle, he murmured. They're trying to bury evidence in sanctity, she replied, and they're using me to do it. DeVoe's gaze swept the audience and stopped. For a second, their eyes met across the nave. He smiled, faint, priestly, knowing. Evelyn turned away. Outside, reporters swarmed like gulls. She and Serrano pushed through them toward his car. Where now? He asked. The archives, she said. Micah said the map's there. Serrano sighed. Breaking into a cathedral vault the same day the church declares a miracle. What could go wrong? That night the cathedral was empty except for candlelight. They entered through the sacristy, Serrano's lockpick slipping easily into the old mechanism. The air smelled of incense and wax. The archive door lay beyond the transept, behind a tapestry of St. Cecilia playing her harp. Evelyn lifted the fabric. Serrano's flashlight caught an iron keypad set into the wall. Old code, he said, squinting. Pre-digital. She traced the keys, each engraved with a Latin letter rather than numbers. On impulse, she pressed SANCTA. A soft click. The panel released. Inside, shelves rose to the vaulted ceiling, stacked with ledgers bound in cracking leather. A cruciform skylight cast blue moonlight down the center aisle. Serrano whistled low. Looks like the Vatican had a baby with the Library of Congress. Evelyn ignored him, scanning for dates. She found a cabinet labeled 1947, Cecilia Convent, and pulled the first drawer. Within lay microfilm reels, correspondence, and a rolled vellum map sealed in wax. She broke the seal. The parchment unfurled across the table, an intricate pentagram overlaid on the convent grounds, each point marked with a name: Sister Agnes, Refectory; Sister Therese, Choir Loft; Sister Miriam, Bell Tower; Sister Catherine, River Crypt; and at the center, Sanctum Reflectorium. The reflection room, Evelyn breathed. Serrano leaned closer. That's where Corbin finished it? Where he was supposed to die, she said. Before they could study further, footsteps echoed from the hall. Evelyn snatched the map, blowing out the lantern. They ducked behind the stacks as the door opened. Light spilled in, and a Father DeVoe entered alone, carrying a candle. I know you're here, he said quietly. The archives remember every breath. Serrano gripped her arm. But she shook him off, stepping into the light. You declared a miracle to distract the world. Why? DeVoe's candle flame wavered. Because the veil is thinning. The sisters are calling for the fifth. You feel them, don't you? The medallion under her blouse pulsed like a second heartbeat. You use them as vessels, she said. You're still using them. They offered themselves, DeVoe murmured. But Corbin failed. He couldn't bear the final reflection. He hid in the mirror instead of passing through. Now it's waiting for someone who can finish the passage. And you think that's me? He smiled. It's already you. He blew out the candle. Darkness swallowed the room. The shelves trembled as if struck by wind, though no window was open. From the shadows came the faintest hum, 4 interlocking notes, soft as breath. The sound crawled along the walls, rising, multiplying, until the entire archive seemed to sing. Serrano shouted, "Evelyn!" But she couldn't hear him. The tones burrowed into her skull, aligning with the rhythm of her pulse. She saw flashes. Agnes kneeling by a bowl of water, Miriam hanging bells from her wrists, Catherine sinking beneath the river. Each image ended in silence and light. Then another voice joined them, a fifth, tentative, hers. The resonance grew unbearable. DeVoe's shape appeared through the blur. "See it," he whispered. "Open the reflection room." Evelyn stumbled back, clutching the map. "No." Serrano pulled her toward the door. The singing stopped as abruptly as it began. DeVoe's candle reignited by itself, illuminating his face. Peaceful, tear-streaked. "You can't run from reflection," he said. "It follows the soul." They fled into the night. At dawn they reached the river. Fog drifted off the surface like breath. Evelyn spread the map on the hood of the car. "The reflection room sits beneath the old chapel ruins," she said. "The only section not reopened after the flood." Serrano rubbed his eyes. "If we go in there, no backup, no warrant, nothing—" "This isn't police work anymore," she interrupted. "It's absolution." He studied her for a long moment. "All right. Then we finish it together." She folded the map, the medallion warm against her skin. From across the water, the cathedral bells began again. 5 strikes, not the usual 4. Each one echoed longer than it should have, as if some unseen chamber were answering back. Evelyn whispered, "The mirrors are aligning." Serrano started the engine. "Then let's break the last one before it breaks you." They drove toward the ruins as the sun climbed blood-red through the mist, turning the flooded valley into a sea of mirrors. The road to the convent ruins wound through the floodplain like a scar. By the time Evelyn and Serrano arrived, the sun had already begun its descent, staining the water with gold. The old chapel stood half-collapsed against the slope, its spire split open like bone. They parked beneath the skeletal remains of a willow. Wind hissed through its branches, a sound almost like whispering. Serrano checked his flashlight and weapon. "If this place starts talking, we leave." Evelyn nodded, though she knew there would be no leaving until it was done. Inside, the chapel smelled of ash and wet stone. The pews were gone, the altar toppled. Ivy crawled through the broken windows, its tendrils glittering with dew. Beneath the altar, a staircase descended into darkness, the entrance marked on the map as Sanctum Reflectorium. They went down. The passage was narrow, cut from limestone, spiraling deep beneath the church. At intervals, carved figures of the 4 sisters lined the walls, each holding a mirror fractured by time. As Evelyn passed, the glass caught her reflection in flickers. Her face multiplied, distorted, mouths whispering things she couldn't quite hear. At the bottom, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber. The ceiling curved like a dome, covered in tiny mosaic tiles that once shimmered gold. In the center stood a pool of perfectly still water, no larger than a baptismal font. A single candle floated upon it, unlit. "This is it," she whispered. Serrano swept his light around. The walls were etched with symbols, Latin prayers intertwined with geometric lines converging on the pool. At the far end, an old iron door lay half buried in silt, its hinges crusted with rust. Evelyn knelt beside the pool. Look! Beneath the surface, something shimmered, a faint reflection that wasn't her own. 4 faces appeared, veiled, serene, eyes closed. Then a 5th began to form. Serrano drew his gun. "What the hell?" "They're waiting," Evelyn said, her voice barely audible. For the final tone. The medallion at her throat grew hot, its circle glowing through her blouse. The candle flickered to life without touch. The water rippled, and the faces opened their eyes. Evelyn staggered back. The sisters' voices rose, layered in haunting harmony that reverberated through the stone. The sound was beautiful and unbearable, vibrating in her teeth, her bones, her heart. Serrano shouted something. She couldn't hear him. The medallion's light expanded, flooding the chamber with white fire. Images flashed. Corbin's hands raised in worship, Devoe kneeling in blood, the sisters sinking beneath the river while their veils floated like lilies. The air thickened until it was hard to breathe. The 5th reflection reached upward from the pool, a pale hand breaking the surface, grasping for her. Evelyn fell to her knees, torn between terror and awe. Serrano grabbed her shoulders. "Evelyn, don't!" But the hand caught hers. Cold shot through her arm, up her neck, into her skull. Her vision inverted. The chamber folding in on itself like a mirror turning inside out. She saw herself standing beside the sisters, veiled now. Her reflection no longer separate but among them. They were singing, and their song was a command. Finish what was begun. Her mouth opened of its own accord, and her voice joined theirs. Serrano tried to wrench her away, but the light that filled the chamber was no longer light. It was substance, thick as water. He could barely move through it. Each pulse of sound from the pool froze the air like glass. "Evelyn!" he shouted, but his voice shattered into echoes, multiplying around them. "Evelyn! Evelyn! Evelyn!" She turned toward him. Her eyes glowed the same white as the medallion. "They're not dead," she said calmly. "They're unfinished." The hand gripping hers began to dissolve into mist, then into light that crawled up her arm, painting veins of gold beneath her skin. For a heartbeat, Serrano saw 5 silhouettes overlapping, Evelyn and the 4 sisters, forming a single figure, half human, half radiance. He raised the pistol and fired into the pool. The shot cracked through the music. Water erupted, spraying shards of reflected light. The harmony faltered, the faces blurred. Evelyn collapsed, the medallion snapping from her neck and falling into the pool with a hiss. Silence. Serrano knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. When he looked at the water again, the reflections were gone. Only darkness remained. "Come on," he whispered, lifting her. "We're done here." They stumbled up the stairway, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The storm outside had returned, rain slanting through the ruined roof. By the time they reached the car, Evelyn had regained consciousness, her gaze unfocused. "Did it stop?" she asked. "I think so." She touched her throat. The medallion was gone, yet a faint circular scar glimmered where it had rested. "Then why can I still hear them?" He frowned. "Hear who?" "The sisters." Their humming thunder rolled overhead, masking whatever she meant. He started the engine. Hospital first, explanations later. As they drove away, the chapel behind them groaned. A deep, seismic crack that split the earth around its foundation. The spire collapsed inward, burying the stairway. A wave of river water surged over the ruins, swallowing the entrance completely. For a moment, 5 faint lights flickered beneath the surface. Then they winked out. 2 days later, Evelyn woke in a hospital bed, machines beeping quietly at her side. Serrano sat nearby with a file folder and 2 cups of coffee gone cold. "You've been asleep 36 hours, he said. "Doctors say you'll be fine, though they can't explain the burn mark." She blinked at the window. Outside, dawn was just beginning, the city washed clean by rain. "What happened to DeVoe?" "Gone," Serrano said. When they searched the seminary, his office was empty. Same for the younger priest. The Vatican issued a statement calling the whole thing a theological misunderstanding. Evelyn laughed softly, a sound halfway to a sob. That's one way to phrase mass murder. He slid the folder toward her. Inside were photographs from the site. Nothing but collapsed stone and water. Whatever was down there, it sealed. She stared at the images. Beneath the surface of one photo, barely visible in the ripple, a pale shape curved like a hand reaching upward. "Do you see it?" she asked. Serrano shook his head. "See what?" She closed the folder. Nothing. That night, alone in her apartment, Evelyn set a candle on the table. She touched the scar on her chest. It was still warm. When she hummed a single note, the flame trembled and divided into 5 smaller tongues, each moving in perfect harmony. She whispered, "You're free now." From somewhere beyond the window came a faint answering chord, 5 tones merging into one, then fading into silence. Outside, the bells of St. Cecilia's tolled midnight, and for the first time in 78 years, the 5th bell rang. The river looked harmless again. It ran smooth and slow beneath the willow branches, reflecting the pale sky and the first orange leaves of autumn. Children sometimes came here now, laughing, skipping stones, because no one remembered why the ground still smelled faintly of incense when it rained. Evelyn sat on the bank with her recorder balanced on her knee. She spoke quietly, as if not to wake something that might still be listening. "Field note," she said. "Day 104 after the collapse. Water level stable. No further activity." The machine clicked softly as it captured her voice. The ritual of documentation had become a kind of prayer, proof that she still lived in a world that could be measured by time and data. Across the river, the ruins of St. Veronica Chapel were half hidden by reeds. New vines had grown where the bell tower once stood. The city had declared the land off limits, but nature never cared for fences. Serrano joined her, 2 coffees in hand. He looked older, his hair threaded with gray that hadn't been there in April. "They've decided to fill it," he said, sitting beside her. "The diocese is turning the site into a memorial garden. Benches, plaques, all the respectable ways to forget." Evelyn smiled faintly. "At least it'll get sunlight." He studied her face. "You still hearing them?" "Not the way I used to," she said. "Sometimes at night I think I hear a chord under the wind, like a memory playing itself back. But maybe that's just what silence sounds like after you've lived inside noise." He nodded. They drank in companionable quiet. A heron stalked the shallows, its reflection perfect on the glassy surface. After a while, Serrano asked, "You ever figure out what the 5th mirror really was?" She hesitated, watching the heron lift off, wings carving ripples across the water. "I think it was never a place," she said. "Not even an object. It was the moment someone looked at what the church tried to bury and refused to look away. Reflection as defiance." He chuckled. "So you close the ritual by telling the truth?" "That's the only kind of exorcism that works." A gust of wind rattled the reeds. She heard, or thought she heard, faint bells from somewhere downstream. 5 tones, soft, almost kind. Serrano didn't react. Maybe only she could hear them now. Later that evening, she walked alone along the floodplain. The sun had dipped low, and the water turned the color of wine. She carried a small wooden box, new wood, unfinished pine, containing 4 rosary beads and a torn scrap of blue fabric embroidered with an M. When she reached the bend where the current was gentlest, she knelt and opened the lid. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "You're remembered." She let the beads roll into the water one by one. Each sank without a ripple, leaving only widening circles that caught the last light of day. The scrap of fabric followed, twisting like a tiny sail before disappearing. For a heartbeat, the surface shimmered, 5 points of silver forming a star. Then it faded, and the river returned to ordinary motion. She waited, half expecting the bells to answer. None did. Maybe that was grace. When she returned home, the apartment felt still for the first time in months. The scar on her chest had faded to a faint white ring. She stood before the mirror above her desk, studying the reflection. It showed only her, a woman marked but intact. Yet, as she turned away, the faintest trace of movement lingered in the glass, a ripple, as though the image had exhaled. Evelyn didn't notice. She sat down and began to type her final report. The disappearance of the Sisters of St. Cecilia's Convent, 1947, cannot be resolved by secular or sacred law. It exists somewhere between. The Church preserved the silence. The river preserved the memory. Both, in their way, are faithful. She paused, then added, "If faith is the act of believing in what you cannot see, then truth is the courage to see what you believed." She hit save. The file blinked onto her desktop under a simple name, The Vanishing Sisters. Outside, the night deepened. A storm gathered far off, but did not come closer. The city lights flickered across the water, scattering in perfect symmetry, 5 long reflections stretching toward the dark horizon. Some said later that on quiet nights near the river you could hear singing, faint and peaceful, threading through the rush of current. Others swore it was only wind in the reeds. Evelyn never argued either way. She moved to a small cottage upriver, taught classes again, and kept her windows open when it rained. Sometimes, when the thunder rolled just right, she would look up from her papers and imagine the sisters walking the riverbank in their pale veils, free of stone and silence, moving toward light. And then she would whisper the line that had followed her since the first night at the ruins. "Beneath the river's skin we pray, for light to find us when we fade." The words always made the candle on her desk flicker, as if agreeing. After that, she would close her notebook, blow out the flame, and listen. Not for ghosts, not for miracles, but for the ordinary rhythm of the river remembering everything it had carried away.